Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to first welcome our live streamers. We're actually live streaming throughout the church, and if you want to watch it, it's christchurchmemphis.org/salt, and you'll get to hear Kim's speech. Now, I do need to move one quick disclaimer about Kim. The last Sunday, when the bulletin came out at Sunday school, or at church, it said that we were having Kim Bearden of Elmwood Cemetery, and I just want y'all to know that she's not a resident there. But we'll get that out figured in a minute. First of all, I want to thank Mary Elizabeth and Leanne back in the back for doing the name tags for everybody. And we've got special guests, Chris and Tanya Carter, with us today. Paul and Nancy Dorman, the head of SALT, are here, and I want to thank them for their work with SALT. And then always thank Debbie and Carla and Jeff back in the kitchen who are going to provide a really good lunch. Today, I know some of you are not going to stay for lunch, but after the speaker finishes, if you'll just stick around for about 10 minutes, we've got a little presentation we want to go through. So let me now talk about Kim Bearden. And I had Kim Bearden speak to a Rotary Club several years ago. I've got a cousin that lived 2 blocks from Elmwood, and when I was a kid and I'd go visit my cousin, my aunts and uncles would put us in the car and take us over and roll us through Elmwood Cemetery, and I thought that was the creepiest thing I'd ever done. But I can tell you now, I like to go through Elmwood Cemetery. So let me say this about Kim. First of all, Kim, we're excited to have you today, and we're going to hear some great stories about this Memphis' oldest and famous cemetery. And Kim, you, Lisa Marie Presley, and I have something in common. All 3 of us were born at the Baptist Hospital. And we're Methodists. That's the only comparison between the 3 of us. But Kim did grow up in the Memphis area. She went to South Haven High School, and she attended the University of Memphis. I went there before they orphaned me with the sweep of a pen and changed the name. She's been at Elmwood since 1998, and she serves as executive director, not a resident. But she's married to the pride of Rolling Fork, Mississippi, filmmaker Willie Bearden, who's spoken to this group a couple of years ago, if you remember. So let's give a real warm Salt Luncheon welcome to Miss Kim Bearden.
Thank you. Let's see, is my mic on? There it is, like magic. I can be heard. That's great. Thank you so much for coming to hear me talk today. I am flattered to see so many smiling faces in the audience. Thank you so much. Interested in Elmwood Cemetery? I have quite a number of people came up to me and asked if where Willie was or if Willie could come, and I'm so sorry that Willie is in New Albany, Mississippi today giving a presentation of his own. He just came out with a book of his own memoir called Mississippi Hippie, and he is out promoting his book right now. So he is not here in town, but I will tell him hello from SALT, because he told me that he had spoken here and that he had such a good reception and experience. But anyway, enough about Willie Bearden. My name is Kim Bearden. Thank you for the warm welcome. I am the executive director of Elmwood Cemetery. I was hired when I was 3 years old to work there and started working there in 1998. I was still in college. I was in my last semester at the University of Memphis. And I always get asked, how did you get into working at a cemetery? I get asked frequently. And so that's why I always tell a little bit about my background. I got a degree in English, and I felt like I wanted to go into the nonprofit sector. I was going to do some kind of social work, or I wasn't sure what it was going to be. And at that time, I was working at the Memphis Botanic Garden as the receptionist. And a friend of mine who worked there, and I was kind of ready to, I was itchy. I was kind of ready to move on a little bit and experience something else. And a friend came up to me and she said, I have a friend who runs a nonprofit organization in Memphis, and she's looking for a receptionist right now. It might be a good transitional job for you. And I said, great, what's the name of the place? And she was like, it's a historic organization. They're doing so much over there. And I was like, great, that sounds cool. What's it called? She was like, well, you really just need to call her. And I was like, so she kind of mumbled, it's called Elmwood. Myself, with each footstep walking into the office, kind of being charmed by it and falling in love with it. And when they opened the lot books and showed me the old 150-year-old books, that was it. I took the job. I have been there since 1998. Became the executive director in 2005, and I've been doing that ever since. And it is my, now I understand at the age of 49, I understand that it is my life's work, that this is a stewardship that I am supposed to be doing. I am honored to be called to do it. So let me tell you less about me and more about Elmwood. Elmwood, let's change the slide. How about that? Elmwood Cemetery was founded in August of 1852 by 50 local businessmen. Does anybody have family buried at Elmwood? Show of hands. Okay, so we do have some people who are a little familiar with it. So founded August of 1852, 50 local businessmen who put some money in a pot, bought 40 acres on the outskirts of town, if you can believe it, and the city grew up around it. It was 2.5 miles outside of the city limits. After the Civil War, they purchased an additional 40 acres to make it a full 80 acres that it is today. The cemetery is one of the oldest nonprofit organizations in the state of Tennessee, which I find to be an interesting factoid that I like to share with people. Yes, we are a nonprofit organization. I know that's kind of strange that a cemetery might be that, but hey, that's what we are. The cemetery was put on, we have 3 separate National Register of Historic Places designations. I don't know why we needed so many, but somebody thought it was important, and so they put our office, which I'll show you a picture of, the bridge that you have to drive over, and the entire 80-acre ground. So we are fully protected by the National Register of Historic Places. This is the office where I get to work. I think I have the most beautiful office in Memphis. I am thrilled to go there every day. I consider it my second home. I literally feel like I leave one house to go to my second house. As with all old homes, this one drives me crazy because it always needs work on it. But that's okay. I love it anyway. It was built in 1866. And this is the building where we keep all of those precious records that I referenced a little while ago, all of those old books. We've done a lot of restoration work on our books over the years. I'm very proud to say we have scanned all of the records, and we have added them to this wonderful research tool that you can access online for free. So if you are interested, you can type in this web address, elmwoodcemetery.org/search, and you will be directed to this little search bar, and you can look up the people who are buried in the cemetery. Now, it's very tricky. You have to spell the name right, which that's a whole thing, but that's okay. If you have problems, you can call us and we'll help you. But not only can you look up the people who are buried there, but you can also get driving directions directly to their gravesite. So it's pretty exciting. We were able to put this entire database together and online through a grant from the Community Foundation of Greater Memphis and matching grants from private donors. So I'm very proud of this. This is what we did during the pandemic. It took several years to get it done, and so we took the opportunity, since we weren't doing tours at that time and meeting with the public per se. We were creating our brand new database, so I'm really proud of it. Also, if you want to, it's open to the public and free, so you can upload pictures, letters, newspaper articles, all kinds of things to this database, and it enriches the experience for others. So if you have family buried there, you might want to add to their records. So this is the chapel that is right across the driveway from the office building, from the cottage. It was built in 2005, and it is so beautiful. If you've never been to Elmwood for any of our presentations or parties or a wedding, we do have weddings at Elmwood, believe it or not. I know that's crazy, but we do. So they mostly happen in this building, and this building is beautiful. Like I said, built in 2005. It can seat about 50, 60 people, so it is a smaller building. But those windows, when you're inside it, frame the cemetery up beautifully. It is truly something that I am very proud of. It is a gorgeous building. I've got one of my board members in the audience today. I'm going to out Janet Sheehan. She's on the Elmwood Cemetery Board of Trustees, and she gets to sit in that building several times a year and just kind of look out and see how gorgeous it is, so she knows. Elmwood Cemetery is old, but it isn't full. I get asked this question all the time. Were y'all still burying people? Yes, we are. In fact, we are very busy. We bury people we have 5 to 7 burials a week. It just kind of depends. So we are pretty busy, but we do have 80,000 people buried at Elmwood. There are a lot of people buried there. I mean, we have been in business for 172 years now. So lots of folks buried there, and I'm proud to say people from all walks of life. And so I think that that's kind of the trick, right? If you want interesting stories and you want to represent the tapestry of Memphis, then you have to be really like open and willing and able to accept all people who need you. And so that's the way Elmwood has always been. So I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but it is not an exclusive cemetery. It's open to everyone. So that means that we have a lot of stories to share with people from Memphis moments in history. Probably one of the best known is the yellow fever epidemics of the 1870s. So that's a big story. The yellow fever indelibly changed Memphis in this person's point of view more than anything else that's ever happened in Memphis. Yellow fever changed the landscape of Memphis forever. There were 3 yellow fever major epidemics, but Memphis, when it was founded, was kind of situated, it was very jungle-like when it was first founded in 1819, when the first settlers showed up here. Lots of trees, lots of bayous that snaked through the downtown area, so filled with a lot of skeeters and other bugs that carried diseases. So times were hard. If you were setting up life in Memphis, Tennessee, in the early years, you had a go of it, and you were probably going to get sick from one of these critters. So the bayous, as we all know what a bayou is. Of course we do. The bayous were stagnant bodies of water. They rise and fall, but there's no real tide through them, right? So perfect burying ground for mosquitoes. I mean, just asking for it, basically. And the early citizens of Memphis there was one bayou in particular called the Gayoso Bayou, and it snaked through downtown Memphis. Incidentally, do you know what happened to it? It's still there, technically, but there's a street paved on top of it, and that street is Danny Thomas Boulevard. So when you drive on Danny Thomas, you're driving on top of the Gayoso Bayou. Little factoid I like to share with everybody. So Memphians during those very early years, I mean, there was no coordinated refuse system. There was no sanitation system in Memphis to speak of. And so they dumped a lot of their refuse. If it wasn't just dumped in the street, then it was dumped in the Gayoso Bayou. And this it's a little graphic, but it's facts. So I have to share it with you. We are adults here. So they would throw their dead animals in the Gayoso Bayou or whatever they produced. And so then it became this gross, smelly, mosquito-filled, fly-filled body of water that just was in everybody's backyard. And so it was the perfect, storm for the yellow fever to flourish in the city of Memphis. And it did in 3 years, 1873, 1878, and 1879. 1878 is the worst of the yellow fever epidemics. You may have read about this in Molly Caldwell Crosby's book, An American Plague. And if you haven't read that, she's a Memphian, and that is a fantastic account of the yellow fever in Memphis. It's really, really good. I'm proud of that book. But anyway, obviously because Elmwood features prominently in it, but that's another story. Anyway, so yellow fever flourishes in those years. In 1878, 200 people were dying every day in the month of September. On average, it was 200 people a day, and 50 of those people were being brought to Elmwood Cemetery for burial. And when they were brought to Elmwood, it got to be, times got to be so desperate, and live people got to be so hard to come by, that there are tales of a mule-drawn wagon being loaded with bodies, and having made the trip so many times to Memphis, it was riderless, or to Elmwood, it was riderless, and it would come by itself, and it would go back to where it was downtown and wait for more bodies to be loaded up. So if you can kind of imagine at Elmwood Cemetery, the caskets, and sometimes no caskets, were lined up on the street. It was very harsh working conditions. There was a gravedigger strike that year because it was such difficult work. It was tough. The Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is pictured here, is the mosquito that carried the yellow fever. And yellow fever, incidentally, is not indigenous to this continent. It came from Africa on slave ships. So that's a little bit about the yellow fever. Now, why do we call it yellow fever? Because the body, the whites of the eyes would turn bright yellow. Due to jaundice, and that was sort of the telltale sign that it was actually yellow fever. But there were so many diseases that ran concurrently that reached epidemic status during those years that you kind of had to wait and see what somebody was dying of. So cholera, typhoid, typhus, malaria, tuberculosis, they were all running at the same time in the city of Memphis. It was a tough place to live. So a lot of the yellow fever history is found at Elmwood. Like I said, we've got a part of the cemetery that's called No Man's Land, where about 1,500 yellow fever victims are buried. And we do an entire yellow fever tour of the cemetery, 90 minutes just devoted to yellow fever history. This is one of the yellow fever heroes that's buried in the cemetery. He gave his life during the 1878 epidemic. His name was Dr. R.H. Tate. And he was, as far as we can tell, the first professional black physician to practice medicine in the city of Memphis. He came to Memphis when the citizens, or when the government, the remaining people who were running the government, put out a call in the nation's newspapers for the doctors and nurses to come and help. Anybody who was willing to come and help, please come to Memphis. We're dying, we need your assistance. Dr. Tate was one of the physicians who answered the call, and he lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, came to Memphis, and unfortunately, within 3 weeks of landing in Memphis, he caught the fever himself and died. So many people erroneously believed that they could not get yellow fever. Because they'd either had a weak case before, they thought it was kind of like one of those chicken pox type things, but it wasn't. You could get yellow fever many, many times. He caught the fever and died. But before he died, he was assigned to work in a part of Memphis called Hell's Half Acre. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Wouldn't you like to live there? It was about a mile away from Elmwood. And it was just a very rough part of town, and none of the other doctors wanted to work there. So he worked there. Like I said, he caught the fever, died, and was buried at Elmwood. His grave went unmarked for 127 years until the Bluff City Medical Society, which is a group of professional African-American physicians, stepped up and donated this lovely stone for him in his memory. So I'm very proud of that. Also, during the COVID pandemic, I got the opportunity to do things that I'd always sort of wanted to do for Elmwood, that I did, like build the database, but also I got the chance to look into Dr. Tate a little bit. I've been talking about this man for over 20 years now. I mean, he is on every one of the tours that I give at Elmwood, maybe with no exception, maybe. But anyway, I finally, I decided there's nothing about him in our records to speak of other than when he died. So I was like, okay, he's from Cincinnati, Ohio. I called the Cincinnati Public Library, and I was like, do y'all know anything about this guy? I mean, I would love to know anything about him. And they were like, why do you want to know? It was very strange. I was like, whoa, buddy, I'm just researching this. But they were a little weird about it. But finally, I talked to the right person. I got the right person on the phone. And he said, let me see what I can do. I'll call you back. And I was like, I'm never going to hear from this guy again. 2 days later, he calls me, and he says, I found 2 newspaper articles about him. I will share them with you, and I am very proud to share with you that his name was Dr. Richard Tate. I know that that doesn't seem like very much, but it is. When you're doing historical research, one little clue can lead to so much more. My next goal is to find out where he went to medical school, and I will get back on that just as soon as I can, but I will. I'm not forgetting about you, Dr. Tate. So we have many people buried, 80,000 people buried at Elmwood, people from all walks of life, the richest, the poorest, captains of industry, innovators, musicians, artists. We have holy men and women buried at Elmwood. We also have Robert R. Church, who was the South's first black millionaire. He's buried at Elmwood. He's probably one of our most famous and infamous residents. He came to Memphis when he was about 12 years old. He was the son of Charles Church, who was a steamboat captain, a wealthy steamboat captain in Memphis. His mother was African-American slave, and she lived in Holly Springs, Mississippi. And his mother died when he was about 12 years old. So he came to Memphis to work full-time on the steamship with his father. He was a very smart child. He worked very hard and rose to the rank of steward, which was the highest rank that an African-American person could reach at that time. And he saved his money. So he was frugal and smart, and bought his first property in the year 1862, before the end of the Civil War. So fast forward just a little bit. Civil War ends. He's a freedman living in Memphis, Tennessee still, and the yellow fever happens. Okay, so yellow fever happens. Lots of the property downtown is abandoned. People left. I like to compare yellow fever to Hurricane Katrina. So if you could leave town, you did leave town. But lots of people couldn't leave town because they had nowhere to go and no resources to get there anyway. So Robert Church was one of the people who stayed in town and watched as a great deal of the property in downtown Memphis was abandoned, houses, businesses, and he scooped them up and slowly built his empire. He is considered the South's first black millionaire because of this. During his lifetime, he did a lot of good for his community. He built a park. He built an auditorium. He put a lot of money into Beale Street Baptist Church, and he did a lot of other things for the community, including when the yellow fever officially passed, the city had lost its charter because so many people fled the city trying to escape this disease that they didn't know what was being caused. I mean, it was beyond terrible. So he was the first person to step up and purchase a $1,000 municipal bond back from the state of Nashville to reestablish Memphis as a city, to buy the charter back, basically. So that's a little bit about his history. He is buried at Elmwood Cemetery. These are some of his family members. There he is seated. I guess he is on your right. I can't do that backwards. I don't know. I can't. People who can do that, I have no idea. They're gifted. But anyway, there he is seated. He's surrounded by his daughters and his second wife. His son, Robert R. Church, is there. He helped establish the Lincoln League in Memphis, and he established the Republican Party in Memphis. And they all went on to do incredible things. His granddaughter served in the Eisenhower administration. I mean, none of the churches are alive anymore, but their history definitely lives on in the city of Memphis and Elmwood. Now, switching gears a little bit, I always like to talk about my ladies, about my lady friends, my women. Marion Scudder Griffin is buried at Elmwood. I am very proud to say she is the first licensed attorney in the state of Tennessee. She is also the first woman who was elected to the Tennessee General Assembly. Now, isn't that cool? She became a licensed attorney on February 15th in the year 1900. Now, this is 19 years before what happened. The women were given the right to vote. Suffrage was passed in the United States. So this is a groundbreaking thing. She, back then, and in some states you still can. I don't know if in Tennessee you can do this, but to become a lawyer, you can read law independently and then be tested or, I don't want to say tried, tested is probably the right word, examined by two separate judges, and she was. And she was found eminently qualified to become an attorney, and so she was on February 15th in the year 1900. She was the first, like I said, she was the first woman to serve in the Tennessee General Assembly and was that for many years. Solo lady. This is her, if you can see in the background behind where I've got her name printed there, that is a historical marker that stands in front of 1900 North Main, which is where Baker Donaldson is, and so I think that's very fitting. But anyway, Marion. So the founding fathers of Memphis are largely and unfortunately not buried at Elmwood Cemetery. I wish they were. I would love to say that they were, but they are not. Their descendants are. Hey, that's pretty good. The three founding fathers of Memphis, Tennessee are Winchester, Overton, and Andrew Jackson. Now, of course, Andrew Jackson's not buried at Elmwood. Boy, do I wish I had a president buried at Elmwood. That would be the most exciting thing. I would never quit talking about it. That would be very exciting. But anyway, but Winchester and Overton do have descendants that are buried at Elmwood Cemetery. The fourth, he's considered to be the silent partner of Memphis, is Mr. John McLemore. John Christmas McLemore was his name. I always think that's wild. His middle name was Christmas. Anyway, he's buried at Elmwood, though. And so why was he considered the silent partner of Memphis? How did he help found Memphis or establish Memphis as a city? Well, he kind of really didn't. He established the city of South Memphis. So he established and started and chartered a rival city to the city of Memphis, okay? So his whole goal, he was a real estate developer, and his whole goal was to take away the city center of business and commerce and bring it just a few blocks south to South Memphis and take everything away from Memphis. Obviously, he failed. We are not called South Memphis. We are called Memphis. To this day, his city that he started was eventually folded into the city of Memphis proper, but there is one vestige remaining of South Memphis, and that is the street McLemore. So if you ever drive on McLemore, if you're familiar with McLemore, that is who it is named after, John Christmas McLemore, who is buried at Elmwood. So that's a little knowledge for you. Probably there are lots of political figures buried at Elmwood Cemetery, a whole lot of them. Kenneth McKellar is buried at Elmwood. Does anybody know who that is? But probably, undoubtedly, the most famous one is this man, Boss Crump, Edward Hull Crump. He was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi. Apparently, a lot of stuff happened in Holly Springs, Mississippi, and he moved to Memphis and became a very well-known political figure in town. Did anybody in here know Boss Crump? Or do you remember your parents talking about him? Or every time I give one of these presentations, inevitably I talk to somebody who's like, "Oh, I remember Boss Crump's funeral, and it was a procession through town, and we all stood at the street and paid our respects because he was so loved, feared." Are they different things? I'm not totally sure, but he was a very well-known political figure. He was elected mayor of Memphis 4 different times and served in the U.S. House of Representatives for 1 term, known as Boss Crump because he became so powerful over time that nothing happened in the state of Tennessee without his blessing or approval or support. If you wanted something done in the state of Tennessee, you went through Boss Crump, which is just wild to me. I wish I could have just met him briefly. So a little bit more about Boss Crump. During his tenure as mayor, the city of Memphis was considered and voted the cleanest city in the United States. Let that sink in for just a minute. Cleanest city in the United States. But it was. We were on Time magazine, not once, but 2 times for being voted the cleanest city in the United States. As I have heard, and perhaps somebody else can corroborate this, he was very strict, and if you littered, you would get a ticket. If you honked your horn on your car, getting a ticket. I see somebody nodding, like, yes, that is a fact. So, right, it was a quiet city, right? Does that blow your mind? Think about it now. Wow. Things have changed. Anyway, so like like so many other people at Elmwood Cemetery, Boss Crump had his monument installed before he died. Now, I understand that it was actually because he had a son who preceded him in death and is buried there. But he also had a very tall obelisk installed, and this is just part of it cut off. You can't even see the whole thing. But it is located right in front of the chapel. And when you drive into the cemetery, it's on the right-hand side. So you see it as soon as you drive in the cemetery. Very noteworthy. He wanted everyone to know. So anyway, I have two little stories to share about Boss Crump. The first, so when he had his obelisk installed, the obelisk was flat on the top. And birds, namely pigeons, would come into Elmwood. You already know where this is going. So they would come into Elmwood, and they would land on top of the obelisk. And what do pigeons do when they land on anything? Exactly. We don't have to say it. We know. So they would land on it, leave their calling card, and fly off. Well, this drove him crazy. He couldn't stand that he had spent all this money on this obelisk, and it was fouled up all the time. And so he hired a local monument company to put up some scaffolding and go up and sharpen the point of it so that birds couldn't land on top of it anymore. And he did that. It's pointed on the top now. Now, unfortunately for poor Boss Crump, a niece of his married a young man with the last name of Pigeon. And so when you go to his lot, you can see all these pigeons surrounding him even in death. So poor Boss Crump, he's not going to get a break from the pigeons. When you drive to Elmwood Cemetery, you drive in, you turn off of Crump Boulevard and turn onto Dudley Street. If you've been there before, you know what I'm talking about. You may notice that Dudley Street is an abnormally wide street. It's, even for an industrial street, is very wide. And the reason that I have heard from credible sources is because of Boss Crump. So people used to come to Elmwood, well, I guess people still do come to Elmwood, and visit their loved ones buried there. But they used to come every Sunday after church. And when they would come, they would bring a picnic basket, and they would stay, and they would visit with one another, and it was a very social event. They would pull the weeds on their lot, maybe plant some flowers, decorate it, if you will. So Boss Crump was coming over to Elmwood one day, and he got caught behind a funeral procession that was particularly long. And this crawled all over him. He did not appreciate having to wait that long. And so he had the street widened 3 times so that he could zip around any funeral procession that he might need to in the future. So that's my story about those were my 2 stories about Boss Crump. So we have veterans from every major American war buried at Elmwood, including the Revolutionary War. Now, if you are like me, you may have noticed that Elmwood was founded far after the Revolutionary War started. Now, how did this happen? How did we get a Revolutionary War veteran at Elmwood? Well, he was not originally buried at Elmwood. He lived in Virginia. His name was Colonel John Smith, forgive me. And he came with his daughter, and when she got married, they came to Memphis to live in Memphis. His daughter married Isaac Shelby, and that is the person for whom Shelby County is named. And it's a very well-placed family. And he died a couple of years after they arrived in Memphis. He was buried at the Winchester Cemetery that was located in kind of behind St. Jude. It's in the news right now, the Winchester Cemetery is. St. Jude is expanding its buildings down there, which they need to, and I'm glad for that. They're doing construction, and they are finding things when they're digging over there. And so they have called me, and they've said, can you help us? That's a little insider information. Yes, we are going to help them if they want our help. So anyway, long story short, he was disinterred from the Winchester Cemetery and moved over to Elmwood Cemetery. The war that is best represented at Elmwood Cemetery with the greatest numbers of people is the American Civil War, of course. There are 1,000 Confederate veterans buried at Elmwood Cemetery on the Confederate lot. There are 20 Confederate generals buried at Elmwood Cemetery. There are 2 Union generals buried at Elmwood. Their families decided to leave them there. That's fine. When Elmwood was founded, the founders of the cemetery set aside 8 acres for the burial of veterans because they just knew that it was going to be needed eventually. That makes sense. So they did. Civil War happens, and the Battle of Memphis, I don't know if any of you are Civil War historians, but the Battle of Memphis lasted about 45 minutes, and I think maybe one person died. So it was not a major battle. It was naval. It was no big deal, and that's fine. The people who were buried at Elmwood who died during the Civil War were brought in on trains and buried from battles that took place elsewhere. Now, fast forward, after the Civil War, the year is about late 1867, beginning of 1868. The United States starts the National Cemetery program. And this is where Arlington Cemetery is fully recognized and established, and other national cemeteries begin popping up around the United States. This is where it comes from. So all of the Union soldiers who were also buried at Elmwood, we had about 463 of them. Not that any of you are counting, but I happen to know the number, so I like to share these factoids with you. If it lives in my brain, it has to live in your brain too. So anyway, so they were disinterred, and they were moved to the National Cemetery on Jackson Avenue. That some of you may. By the way, that cemetery is lovely. If you've had a chance, if you haven't been over there lately, they've really fixed it up. You should drive through sometime. It's nice. But anyway. Those soldiers were disinterred, moved over to that cemetery. Okay, so right before they were scheduled to be moved out of Elmwood, the people who were in charge of the whole operation, of the movement operation, took a piece of yellow chalk and wrote the name of the soldier who was inside each casket on the side of the casket, the purpose of which was to match up their headstone later on, right? So they could know who everybody was. Guess what happened the night before they were going to move everybody out? Yeah, it sure did. And all but 11 names washed off the sides of the caskets. When you go over to that cemetery, that National Cemetery on Jackson, you're going to see a whole lot of unknown Confederate soldiers, or unknown U.S. soldiers, I should say, forgive me. And that's the reason why. Because these things happen. We're human. We have to learn the hard way, don't we? Let's see. The wreck of the Sultana, you may have heard of this, greatest maritime disaster in U.S. history, even more so than the Titanic. How about that? About 1,500 people lost their lives on board the Titanic. They're saying over 1,700 people lost their lives on board the Sultana. In summary, the wreck of the Sultana, which is pictured here, happened on April 27, 1865, in the wee hours of the morning. There have been several books written about this subject matter, and there's also a really good museum over in Marion, Arkansas, that I hope you will go over and see if you have not. It is a great day trip. There's a little cafe next door. You can get a bite to eat. But it's a fantastic museum that they are in the process of greatly expanding right now. But anyway, you'll get the full story of the Sultana if you do that. The Sultana, it was overloaded with people, and there are lots of reasons for that, but it was overloaded with thousands of people and with livestock on board the ship. All the people who were on board the ship were Confederate prisoners of war who had been released from places like Cahaba. And so they were just trying to get home. That's it. When the Civil War was over, they were just trying to get home. The people who owned the Sultana crammed all these people on board the ship because they were getting paid $5 for every enlisted man they offered transport to. So it was greed that was behind all of this. The ship made it to Memphis, Tennessee. It was about 7 miles north of Memphis, Tennessee. The boiler exploded, and the disaster happened. Some people were killed instantly. Some were thrown into the river, which I don't know if you've ever looked at the Mississippi River, but that does not look like the river you want to try and swim in, especially not in April when all the melt from the winter months is beginning to happen up north. It was devastating, and some people survived, but most of the people on board the ship did not. They were moved to Elmwood Cemetery. Most of them were soldiers, and so they were ultimately moved out of Elmwood to the national cemeteries that I just spoke about. So that whole story of the Union soldiers at Elmwood is just a slow-moving train wreck that just kind of never ended. But the wreck of the Sultana, why don't we learn about this? Why do we learn about the Titanic instead of the wreck of the Sultana? Well, 13 days prior to the Sultana exploding on the Mississippi River, something else happened in U.S. history, something very big and terrible, and that was the assassination of the United States president. And the manhunt for the people who killed him and for the people who aided and abetted the killing. And so, maybe rightfully so, I don't know, the newspapers all focused on the assassination of Lincoln, and they did not give much story power to the Sultana. This is a photograph of the Sultana when it was docked outside of Helena, Arkansas. You can see how many people are on board the ship. If you look closely, the ship almost capsized right after this picture was taken. So many people on board the ship rushed to the side of the ship to attempt to be in the photograph that was going to appear in the newspaper because they wanted their loved ones back home to know that they were still alive after the Civil War, because they had been in prisoner of war camps. Think about it. So they rushed to the side of the ship. The ship almost capsized. They ran back over, and luckily it didn't, but it was about to happen. Other people buried at Elmwood of note: Wade Hampton Bolton. You may have heard about Mr. Bolton. Mr. Bolton is probably one of our most infamous residents buried at Elmwood. He owned a cotton firm downtown. He also sold, he had a slave trading firm. And this is a very convoluted story, but the story is that he got into a fight with his business partner, and it resulted in a great family feud, and 7 people died as a result of this family feud. It went on for like 9 years. It was crazy. People were shot. One person was set on fire. It was bonkers. His business partner was also, they were related by marriage. So that's why I refer to it as a family feud. Anyway, so one day, Mr. Bolton in 1869, Mr. Bolton is walking through Court Square, and he sees his enemy, Tom Dickens, approaching from the other side of Court Square. And they see each other, and they stop, and they pull pistols on each other, and they fire. And, of course, Wade Bolton did not get a shot off on Mr. Dickens, but Mr. Dickens did hit Mr. Bolton in the shoulder. So what happens? Mr. Bolton drops his cane, runs out of Court Square screaming, I've been murdered, arrest him, he's done it, Tom Dickens has killed me. He runs home and he writes a will, and the will becomes the longest open will in Shelby County probate court history, I think, to this day. There are many reasons for that. One of the things that Mr. Bolton did in his will was he left 1/5 of what Judas Iscariot got for betraying the Lord to his niece Josephine, who had married into the Dickens family. Can you believe she did that? He also left $10,000 to the widow of Stonewall Jackson, whom he'd never met in real life, but he read in the newspaper that she had fallen on hard times after the Civil War, and so he wanted to help support her. The story goes on, but he ultimately left a pot of money to start an agricultural and technical school in the county for poor farmhands, and that school today is known as Bolton High School. It's still around, so Wade Bolton's story lives on. The reason I included his picture, if you can tell, that he is depicted as he was in real life. His jacket is rumpled, his suit doesn't fit very well, his shirt is misbuttoned, and his shoelaces are untied. And this is what he was like. This is Wade Bolton personified. It's said that when his wife saw the statue, she fainted clear away because it looked so much like him. So I'm going to start wrapping up now because I know everybody's getting hungry, but we have people from all walks of life, like I said, buried at Elmwood, Chinese Americans. We've got 2 Greek sections at Elmwood that are beautiful. They largely depict these photographs on their monuments, I think, that are really, really neat. That's just baked on porcelain, but they're really beautiful. People with senses of humor are buried at Elmwood Cemetery. Dorothy Ann Whitaker. She came up with the stone herself. She thought it was hilarious. She didn't even want a headstone. And I met her before she died, and she said, "Don't tell my daughter." And I'm okay. Well, I hope your daughter likes it. But anyway, so that's it. These are our cradle graves. You may have seen about this on social media or read about it in the paper. The idea, these are adult-sized cradle graves. We have them small for children, but they also come in all sizes. And we've opened up to the public a gardening program at Elmwood. And these days, this is what they look like. I have about 150 volunteers at Elmwood gardening, and they come and go as they please. They make the cemetery so much more beautiful, and they keep it up in the spirit in which it was intended, which was, when Elmwood was founded, it was founded as a park for the living and a resting place for the dead. It wore two hats in that way, so I'm glad to do that. We have lots of tours in the cemetery. Some of your children or grandchildren, or maybe you have come on one of them. Youth education tours that take place. In fact, we're about to heat up for the month of September and October. We do tours all the time. And then we have adult education tours that we do, and those are more thematic. So we have a tour, for instance, called the Scandals and Scoundrels Tour, and that is, I like to call that the gossip tour of Elmwood. So if you want the good gossip, you can come and take that tour. The Soul of the City Tour is our biggest fundraiser of the year. It takes place October 11th and 12th. And it is the tour where you'll meet people dressed in costume. So that's our costume tour. And you can pick out the time for your ticket. So we have multiple times you can come, and you walk through the cemetery anytime those 2 days. And it's just a wonderful experience. Not to bring up his name again, but Willie Bearden may be in it this year again. He usually depicts Boss Crump, but this year he's going to be somebody else. He likes to tell people that he doesn't get volunteered, he gets voluntold. So, okay, but sure, that's what you get from marrying the executive director. That is all I have to share with you today about Elmwood Cemetery. I hope I have squeaked in and given enough time for you to eat. But I love talking about Elmwood, and it's hard for me to wrap up. But I appreciate your patience with me. It has been delightful sharing some stories about Elmwood, and I'll answer any questions anybody has if you have any. No? Okay. Oh, yes, sir.
Well, my question really would be, you say 80 acres.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you're burying people on a weekly basis. So, capacity. How many people can be buried there going forward?
That's a very good question, and we get asked that question all the time. We probably have about 7 to 10 years left on the outside of activity at Elmwood. And so this is my sales pitch. If you would like to come and be buried at Elmwood Cemetery, come and talk to me after this program or call me up. My name is Kim Bearden, and I will be glad to meet with you and show you property around. But no, you hit the nail on the head, Mr. Brooks. When it's gone, it's gone. I mean, we can't make more land. That's just how it is. So, yes, sir. Did you have a question?
Hold on one second, if you will. Let us get your microphone so the streamers can hear you.
All right. About the Sultana, the people that died that were brought to Elmwood and then moved to the National Cemetery were Yankees?
Yes, sir. They were largely Yankees.
And the National Cemetery is strictly for Yankee troops.
That is correct.
Okay.
They were. Mm-hmm. Janet says I should tell you about the columbarium, and she's right, I should. So we have a columbarium now. We have several columbarium at Elmwood now, and those are like mausoleums for ashes. Got me? So that's the easiest way I can explain it. But they're beautiful. They're right outside of the chapel, and they're engraved with beautiful original art by a local artist named Martha Kelly. If you know her, her work is featured on them. They're very unique. We've also just ordered 3 new units that are going to go on the east side of our cottage. They're going to be knockouts, just really beautiful pieces back there, and I'm excited about them. They'll be coming in about a year. But so if you choose cremation, you can also be interred at Elmwood Cemetery. Lots of people are.
Okay, anybody else? Well then, Chris, can I ask you to come up and pray for Kim, please? And once again, we'll sit still for just a minute. We've got something
Thank
special
you so
going on
much.
after
I
this.
appreciate it.
Ms. Bearden, it's been an honor to have you. I was here when your husband, Willie, shared he was early on in SALT and did a phenomenal job, but you are equally or even more improved storyteller than he is. I mean, it's amazing. I don't know how the two of you fit in one house. That's spectacular, but thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much.
I think it's ironic that on my last SALT luncheon that we've had a lot of unique and wonderful programs over the years, but this one's on burial. I don't know if there's any meaning to that to me or not, but I feel uniquely honored to get to hear you for my last SALT luncheon, and you did a great job. And we do consider Elmwood a ministry. You know, death is part of living. And even though it's not the part that we like to talk about, for those of us who are in Christ, we know that this is not the end. Every exit is an entrance. And the entrance of death is the fulfillment of everything that we have believed as people of faith. And so I'm so blessed today that we've had such a good turnout to hear Miss Bearden tell Brother Willie that we love him too. And I love that statement of voluntold. I think that is amazing, and I know exactly what he means. Let's pray for Miss Bearden and ask the Lord's blessings on her. Father, we thank you for a long and yet not a finished career as executive director of Elmwood Cemetery for Miss Bearden. Lord, to be somewhere that long is unique and it's wonderful. Thank you that the stories of Elmwood flow out of her heart so easily. We thank you not only for the stories, but we thank you for her spirit, Lord, that is obviously alive. Your joy flows through her as she shares these stories and as she greets and meets families all over Memphis who come there during vulnerable times in their lives. We thank you for all that's been accomplished there, for the database that was been able to put together through COVID. We thank you, Lord, for your book, that great book, Lord, that when we open our hearts to you, that our names are recorded. We thank you for your awareness of us and that we have the opportunity to truly not only be born, but be born again and live life to its fullest. We ask, Lord, as a group of people whose your eyes are on today, that you would stir our hearts and that whatever we have left before we die, Lord, that you would grant us the abundant life and that we would be a part of helping others love life because of our influence. Bless Miss Bearden and her family, and we thank you for the rest of today, and we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, brother.
Chris, if you'll stay up here just a minute. Elizabeth. This is Elizabeth Duncan, who was one of the early on members of the Senior Adult Committee, and she's got something she wants to say.
Thank you for not calling me old. But I am, and that's okay. It was announced, first of all, Kim, you need to know not only did your husband come, but Molly Crosby, who wrote the book on yellow fever, and who was the guy from the Sultana who spoke? Yes, he did a great job. So many of us perhaps heard those two speakers. So thank you for being here today. Just a great presentation. Last Sunday, we learned that Chris and Tanya Carter would be leaving us in early September. This is your time to say, oh no, please don't go. Because that's the way all of us feel. We know we love this man and his precious wife, and they will be missed so much. I think it's appropriate, since this is his last SALT, that we spend just a little bit of time talking about what has happened in senior ministry in the 12 years he's been here. In 2002, the Carters came to Memphis, came to Christ Church, and one of the first meetings Chris went to was to meet with Mike Sheehan, who was then chair of the senior ministry. And together they decided that they had a goal to enhance and to grow the senior ministry. And I think you will agree that in 12 years it has grown exponentially. So thank you, Chris, for that, for your leadership. I want to just tell you briefly about the 3 programs that have been developed over the last 12 years. The first was Senior Adult Luncheons. Chris came in 2012 in the summer, and in 2013 we held our first banquet in this room, real tablecloths, real china, and real crystal. And over the years, we had marvelous speakers that Chris was able to bring in, speakers and entertainers. We think that by looking back at the records that probably about 1,700 people attended those banquets over the years. They were well attended, well loved, and again, it was under Chris's leadership that happened. The second program was called the Senior Safaris, later named Sheehan's Senior Safaris, which is really a mouthful, Janet, named after the late Mike Sheehan. And that was a quarterly trip taken on our church bus. Dick Cockrell was our leader, and we went all over the Mid-South looking at points of interest, learning about our city, learning about the Mid-South, and we always had lunch. It was always followed by lunch at an iconic Memphis restaurant. So that was a great program. Again, both the banquet and the safaris ended with COVID, as did much. Ended then. But this program, the reason you are here today, is SALT, Seasoned Adults Learning Together. And this was the one that we surveyed the seniors. Chris said, let's ask our seniors, what is it going to take for people to come and have lunch and hear a speaker? So again, Chris's leadership made all this happen. We surveyed the seniors, and we found out that what you wanted was you wanted to learn, you wanted to eat, because after all, we are Methodist, and you wanted to have time to fellowship. And out of that came the program SALT. So this is our 12th year of SALT. It grows every year. We thank you to Dick Cockrell and to other members of the ministry, the senior adult team, who continue every year to make this program better. So thank you, Chris. It's going to be hard for me to say this. You know, I've been known to shed a tear. We are grieving because Chris and Tanya are leaving us. But we are so excited to see what God has in store for you. You're going to love New Albany, Mississippi, and they are going to love you. And my husband says that probably in 6 months, everybody in town will know Chris and Tanya, and he may one day run for mayor.
No way.
So, but we're only 90 miles apart, and if Pastor Paul will let us, then probably some of us will be making that trip on Sunday morning to hear you preach. We have just a really small token of our appreciation. How do you say thanks, or what is a gift for somebody who's meant so much to this ministry? So thanks to our communications director, Miles, you were somewhere. I saw you. Oh, there you are, right there with your camera. We called Miles on Monday and said, gosh, it's Chris's last SALT. We have to do something. And so we started talking about salt. And I know you can't see this, but we're going to leave it up here on the front. Brother Chris Carter on the front with his wonderful picture, with his head back, and with that your wonderful laugh. It says, add to hungry congregations, broken hearts, and thirsty spirits. And then on the side, it says SALT. Would you hold this while I put my glasses on? A staple ingredient at Christ Methodist Church since 2012. Brother Chris enhances the flavor of any congregation hungry for the Spirit of God in their midst. With unrivaled tenderness and care, Brother Chris is a proprietary blend of love and truth, which is guaranteed to season any ministry with love and growth. And then, of course, we listed the ingredients, which are pretty much the fruits of the Spirit. So, Chris, we give this to you. We hope we'll put it on your cabinet in your office and have it when you get ready to start a SALT program in New Albany. We love you, man. We love you to death.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Listen, now we have lunch in the back. If anybody's going to stay with us, There's no cost for the lunch, but we asked for an $8 donation just as a pass-through to help cover the cost of it. We hope you can all stay with us. Kim, I don't know. I usually don't count heads, but I think this is probably the largest group we've ever had in here. And it's well over 80 people. Usually we have 50. So everybody better rush back and get their lunch because there's not going to be, we may come up short. I may not be able to eat. But thanks again for coming, and we'll see you next month. David Montague from Memphis Teacher Residency will be here. And I forgot to mention one person that's in here that you should know, and that's my wife, Ellen, who also is sort of a co-person here for the salt luncheons. I know, understand I've been told to, So anyway, thanks again for coming. I hope you've had a good time, and we'll see you next month.